Hello classes, this is Dr. Pete, and I hadn't done a political video for some time, but one came up about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and what that concept is relates to the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is obviously the mechanism to elect the President of the United States along with the Vice President. And so each state has a popular vote, so we call it like a state popular vote, and those Electoral College votes, depending on how the state is developed or designed, Nebraska and Maine being proportional, the rest being first past the post, meaning all votes are given to the person who wins that state popular vote. All the votes roll up into a national popular vote, but that doesn't mean anything. It just means a person either got it or didn't. But what's important is how those Electoral College votes go, and 270 is the winning number. Now, if it doesn't get to 270, it goes through the House, the House of Representatives. There's all these mechanisms in place, and then also they elect the president, and the Senate elects the vice president. But it's also based off of state delegations or state votes, if you will, with the House, and it's also with senators each get one vote in particular. So it's a little bit different situation in the House and the Senate. Having said that, this compact, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, is one that is troubling in my mind, meaning it's kind of like a clever little trick that people want to use. And if you look at the states that signed up for it, it's deliberately one party. And I'm not trying to make it a party issue, but anytime you have that, it becomes political. You start wondering, like, well, why is it that group of people want it that way? Well, obviously they see this as the way they win the presidency for some time, and that should bring concern a great deal. In other words, they're willing to put politics above stability of the country, and they're willing to change the Constitution, for their win, not the win of the country and the people. The Founding Fathers did put the Electoral College in there for several checks and balances. While the electors have never bucked the vote, really, in like what they call faithless or unfaithful electors, really hasn't. I mean, it never changed the election outcome. That was their concept as a check and relief or check valve. But having said that, it concerns me on the surface is that why would a group of people come together and say, instead of amending the Constitution correctly, they just want to do an end run. They want to do what they call poor man's constitutional amendment, and that should distress anybody, because what happens when enough people say, well, we don't want to enforce the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, we don't like 1 through 10, and we're just going to stop doing it? That becomes quite the issue at that point. And they can make whatever case they want, but what happens when that starts happening? And so if you let this slide, where's the next issue? And so what does the Constitution means when people simply can just say, well, we're just going to make our own decisions. We're just going to interpret things and make it work for us. That should scare anybody, because at that point, they could interpret what the First Amendment means. Yes, you have a right to say something to yourself in your house, but not out in public. We're still have fidelity to the Constitution, but we're going to interpret it. Or Second Amendment, yeah, there are limits on gun control, but what happens when they say, well, you're not part of a militia, and that's not what the Founding Fathers meant. They meant this, not that, and we're going to take away all the gun rights. That becomes very scary very quick. So anytime you lose a right, government's very slow, and you'll probably never get that right back. And so before this debate takes off, take time to think, while you may be inclined to believe something temporarily because it might aid or support the person you want in, think about it long term, and think about the stability of the country versus the expediency of the moment. And that the Electoral College system, with all its faults, and we know there have been faults, especially in the original design of the president versus the vice president that had to be cleaned up with amendment, we have to really note that it has provided stability in the system, and no other system that I've seen can do that. The National Popular Vote is one that people will know, but I ask them the simple question, where are all the checks and balances? Do you believe in your heart and in your mind that the president running for re-election will actually say, that state cheated, I shouldn't win, the other person should? Do we really believe that? And do we believe the Congress of that party would sit there and say, well, they cheated, or we cheated, we'll give you the presidency, or the Supreme Court that's nominated and confirmed by that same party. Do you really believe that those justices will do the right thing? It doesn't matter the party. That's not the issue. But think about it from the long standpoint. Do we really want a system in place that promotes fraud and abuse of the system with very, very few, if not real, checks and balances? And that should be a concern. So it's something to think about. Anyways, having said that, I thank you for the topic and best of luck.